Please make Gasho. May the sacred presence of the one who said he would abide in his teaching be our guide. May we follow his glorious example and tread with unfaltering steps his noble path, until we too shall attain enlightenment. All Buddhas throughout space and time, all honored ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, wisdom beyond wisdom, Maha Rajna Paramita. Good evening. Maybe I should say good evening again. I should have asked. I forgot to ask. Maybe someone will tell me later about how Rohatsu was for the Wy'East group. I wasn't here last week. I was sitting sesshin with the Dharma Ring group. A gift to myself after a year of CPE, just the opportunity to sit for an entire week. And there's something profound about being able to sit for an entire week, being in that supportive container that makes it possible to spend a lot of time with looking at one's own mind. Because what becomes apparent, there's often this idea of, oh, this is going to be so peaceful, it'll be calm, it'll be quiet, it'll be so and sometimes that happens. A lot of times, at least for me, what happens is I get to see my own reactivity. I get to spend a week with myself. I get to spend a week with this construct that I label me, a week with this collection of habit patterns and reactivity, a collection of assumptions and judgments and just mental baggage. And at least for me this past week, the first several days were very relaxing, settling into that quiet peace. And then noticing all of those edges of the self arose. A little bit of irritability, a little bit of anger, a little bit of disappointment, a little bit of judgment, a little bit of tiredness and resistance. And I don't want to do this right now because I'm tired and I want to go take a nap and I still have 2 more hours to sit. That happens. That happens for Zen teachers too. There's nothing magical that makes my retreat more equanimous than anybody else's retreat. I'm just going to put that on the table. But from that, clarity did arise. And I think that's the benefit of being able to sit for a long amount of time, for a concentrated amount of time, is that eventually clarity does arise. It's often not what is expected. It often doesn't show up as imagined. And it can be surprising when it shows up. Oh, look at this. The self gets seen and seen through. The mind gets seen and seen through as well. And as all things are impermanent, sesshin comes to an end and we fall back into the everyday world where things move at a different pace and interactions happen in a different way. All of a sudden, we're back to verbal communication as opposed to gestures and bells that signal what's going to happen next. During this week of Rohatsu, during sesshin, I was asked to offer sanzen a couple of times, which I was happy to do so. And a theme arose from some of the folks I was speaking with. And it was a theme that I resonated with. And it was a theme about practicing with an aging body, of practicing with a body that doesn't bend the way it used to, or a body that doesn't function the way it used to. Perhaps there's a struggle around pride in sitting in a chair versus sitting on the floor. Perhaps there's a struggle around pride in refusing to sit in a chair and sitting on the floor and sitting with the pain of sitting on the floor. Perhaps there's a struggle around my back can't do this anymore. Or perhaps this is just a young person's practice. So several people had come in with this sense of like, oh, it's so hard. Sitting in the Sanzen seat, I couldn't quite say, yeah, I know, me too. Sitting in the Sanzen seat, there is that aspect of taking that view from the absolute, holding a wider container for the struggle, even as my knees were hurting, even as my back was complaining. This is possible. It's possible to be in a place and to hold the pain, to be in the place and sit through the discomfort. That part of practice is becoming familiar and intimate with discomfort and just knowing it as discomfort. Nothing that needs to be grasped after or pushed away. So the process of offering sanzen, just holding a place that was seeing with a bigger view and yet responding from a place of compassion. You don't have to sit on the floor the whole time. It's okay not to. All the while thinking I should be taking my own advice and not doing it. But that wasn't what I wanted to bring forward for this talk today. What I wanted to bring forward from the talk was in listening to the voices of the people I was practicing with, listening to sort of what was coming up for people and honing in on an edge of like it wasn't the pain that was problematic. The pain was just a fact. It wasn't the pain that was causing the suffering. It was the disappointment. The disappointment in realizing a body couldn't do what a body used to do, what the mind thinks the body should be able to do. And this is a place that I think I can say all of us have stumbled from time to time. It's definitely a common human thing. And part of bringing it forward is, also in listening to my patients in the hospital, what I hear also that they struggle with is the disappointment of not having bodies that work the way they think they should. There is this idea that, or at least an idealized view, an idealized expectation that I, small self I, inhabit a young spry body. Perhaps it's just a carryover from the past. Perhaps. But that's not the reality of it. Part of what happens when we sit zazen is that we get to see the reality of things, not just labeling them as, yes, all things are empty of inherent self-existence, and so therefore all things are empty, and yes, emptiness is true. It's sort of an intellectual way of looking at it. But sitting with a body that doesn't work the way we think it should, becoming familiar with that body, becoming intimate with that body, brings up a different set of experiences. I remember at one point offering a suggestion to someone to lean into that discomfort, to examine it, to know it fully. At what point does it begin? What does it feel like? Is it throbbing? Is it dull? Is it sharp? Is it hot? Is it cold? When does it go away? What does it feel like when it's there? What does it feel like after it goes away? And I could watch the shift in a face when that sense of self-judgment and disappointment shifted to curiosity. It was visible, not just in the face, but in the whole body relaxed because there wasn't, here's a um, ideal that I'm holding, and here's this body that's not working the way I want it to. And I keep just trying to make these things be the same, and they're not the same. And then there's disappointment. And perhaps that disappointment sometimes deepens into a sense of not good enough, or a sense of shame, a sense of things should be otherwise, and it's my fault. Perhaps I didn't exercise enough when I was 20. Perhaps I should have gone to the doctor more. Perhaps I should have eaten something different. There's all these reasons that we can put around disappointment. Why I didn't live up to my expectations. Can have disappointment about outside things as well. Why those things didn't live up to my expectations. Creating the ideal is part of the problem. Holding this ideal of something perfect, or the way things should be. Oftentimes we create an ideal out of the way we want things to be, and then label it, these are the way things should be, because we want them that way. This is just a manifestation of desire. So greed, hate, and delusion are those three poisons that bring up all of this suffering that we experience. And that aspect of wanting things to be a particular way has elements both of greed and delusion. And you could add in a little bit of anger in there, which pushes that I want things to be different. They're not different. So we work with the body, we work with disappointment in practice. We become intimate with that. What is this? In a big container, in a still container, we have the time and space to investigate that. It's harder when meditation is smaller, shorter, but it can still happen in other times of contemplation where there's space to examine our experiences. So just because I'm talking about week-long meditation retreats, don't think that it's inaccessible if you're not doing week-long meditation retreats. Insights can arise at any time. With thought, with contemplation, with a sense of being really honest with ourselves, being really clear about what's going on in our minds. I want things to be different. Today I was working with several people who had suffered strokes. Their lives are going to be very different than they had been before. And several of the people I spoke with had been very socially active, really enjoying time spent with friends, or very physically active, ski clubs and bike rides. And lives are very different now. Still, there's this element of, I really hope things can get back to the way they were. And also carrying the sorrow that they probably won't. This is also the same with aging bodies. I want things to be the way they were. But time doesn't go in reverse. And aging doesn't unage, which I don't think is a term. Happens in sci-fi movies, but I have yet to see it in reality or in people around me. So then the question becomes how to move towards that sense of acceptance, how to move towards that sense of like, huh, life is going to be different now. This is a new chapter. What is this? Once again, developing that sense of curiosity. What is this? What is this experience? What is the range of what is possible? Hmm. How do we stay in contact and keep connections with aspects of life that we might not be able to access in the way we had previously? What else is possible? How to shift that disappointment into um, something different. It doesn't have to be full, immediate acceptance. Like, I can't do what I did. Bam, everything's okay. I'm happy now. Because that's just bypassing. Hmm. So that's not the goal either. It takes a lot of courage to become familiar with your own mind and your own body. It takes a lot of courage to be um, present with this process of aging and change. It takes a lot of courage and curiosity to lean into what is the complete, full, embodied experience of pain in the joints, nerve pain in the hands, back pain, hot flashes, sleepiness, inability to digest things that we used to love eating. Like all of these things happen, right? Being able to stretch and get a full range of motion. And all of the various creaks and groans and pops that happen moving through a silent room. We live in a culture that mm, enjoys this idea of eternal youth. And yet there is so much wisdom that comes in having lived through experience and learned from our accumulated physical and emotional scars that come from meeting the conditions of life. Look at this. Look at this group. How many years have we survived and thrived and celebrated? These are good things. Mm. And seeing these things from a place of stillness and clarity, give them a different light, give them a different color. Mm. It becomes not something I tell myself I should see or a view that I should hold, but it becomes something that is known as true for oneself. So I'm very curious once we move from the talk portion to the discussion portion to hear you speak in your own words what is true for yourself in your experiences of being an embodied being that practices, that sees this very personal, physical, immediate way that impermanence happens, and to celebrate that. That's what I've got for this evening. It's a little bit of a short talk, but I'm also being mindful of my capacity at the moment. So I would love to hear from you all.
I can start. Thank you, Jyoshin, for your talk. And I realized I haven't really. So I was in Sesshin also last week, and I haven't really processed it with anyone. So I appreciate the opportunity to kind of reflect on what the body is like now when practicing. Um,
Mhm.
I realized it was my sixth Sesshin, full Sesshin at home, and the third time I did it, I thought I would try to work too. And I think my kids were with me like one or two nights of it. And that like totally didn't work at all. So it was so hard to come in and out. Like
Mm.
it made me more tired actually. So since then, it's just like, I just do it like I do it if I was in person at a Zen center.
Mhm.
And, uh, and this time what I noticed was, well, I was worried about getting up early. I take a medication at night that makes me pretty sleepy in the morning, and but that was no problem. And I don't know how to quite articulate this, but I think, and some of you know this very well. I definitely went through a period, particularly when I was living at Darmarine, where I really tried to kind of do a Zen or die, stay on the cushion no matter what, explore the discomfort, all the things that you were talking about, Jyoshin. But at the end of it, it all sort of meant stay on the cushion.
Mhm.
And that didn't actually end up so well for me and that approach. And so one of the things that really became clear last week for me that had been building but really sort of blossomed in a new way last week was um, my increased capacity to have a much more loving and caring relationship with my practice.
Mhm.
Mhm. And not so it's kind of similar to what you were just talking about, Joshin, but I think for me the difference was like mm, I don't know if I can articulate it yet. Like sometimes I wanted to recline because I was
Mhm.
sleepy, and I remember the first time I thought about reclining, I was like, "Don't do that. Stay upright. Stay upright." And I was like, "Well, why don't I just experiment and be curious with what it would be like to lay down?" And I did,
Mhm.
and I just felt so held and nourished by the group I was sitting with, and um, yeah, so it was a very sweet week for me. It just felt nourishing. That's the word that keeps coming up. I just felt so held by the practice and by this body and this mind and this heart. So
Yeah.
thank you for the opportunity. Sorry, I went on for a long time. Thank you for the opportunity. I haven't talked about it yet, really. So thank
Mhm.
you.
Mhm. I'm glad you let yourself lie down. That's one of the four traditional meditation postures: standing, sitting, walking, lying down. I'm glad you leaned into that. Ha ha ha. Takeo got the pun.
I really relate to what you were saying about dealing with the aging body and the changes and acceptance of that. That really resonated with me. I struggled with that, kept thinking, well, after this, then I'm going to get back to normal. After that, I'm going to get back to normal. And then, oh, this new ache and pain. Oh no, now I'm afraid of that one because I don't want to go through it anymore. And
Mhm.
the other thing is, I don't know that I ever totally identified myself with what I did, but I think that's easy to do. I mean, I was a tennis player, I was a
Mhm.
skier, I was a hiker, I was all these things that I'm not anymore, but I still am because they're still part of me, what I experienced in my life. But it's hard to let go of that. And been able to find other things, but it's been really hard for me to accept that probably my body has changed. And I didn't at the time that it all began think of myself as that old, but it's not always age related. It sort of happens. And
Mhm.
so I really related to accepting. And then my doctor told me recently, he says, you have to just become comfortable with the unknown. And I think that's so true, you know? I can't freak out every time like something different happens. I have to realize I'm here. I've got good doctors. I've got good support. I'm not really sure if I'm afraid of dying. I'm afraid of suffering.
Mm.
I don't want. I just want to go quick, But we don't always get to choose that. So I just really relate to what you said because just having a changing body is hard. And when you're young, you don't think of that. You think, oh my. I always thought whatever I wanted my body to do, it did, and it did it well. And it's hard to know that that's not true, but I think it's important as we notice those body changes, like you were saying, for me to hug my body, hug and love my body. It's still a really good body, even though it's changed. I think it's really important.
You
Well,
have a
thank
new
you.
body to explore.
Yeah,
Mhm.
and nurture. But thank you. That was really resonated a lot with what you said.
So when you introduce yourself to people now, how do you do that?
Me?
Mhm.
I don't know. It's a good question. I guess I just say who I am. I don't identify. I guess if somebody says, "Well, you're an artist," I said, "Well, I want to be an artist. I love art, and I love my dogs and I love my garden. I love my friends." But I don't know. That's a good question. I still relate to the people I know that go ski joring with their dogs and play tennis, but and I appreciate it. I really appreciate what goes into that. But I don't know. That's a good question. Yes, I'm gonna think about that one. I think I just say I'm Trish.
Good place to start.
Well, it's funny to me, Jyoshin, thank you for your talk, to hear you talk about aging, because even though I know that you're an adult and you've been through a lot of things that I haven't, you still seem young to me. So, but I know that that's, that we're all aging no matter what age we are and changing. But for me, it's such a fine line. I'm always questioning if I'm just slothful or if I'm tired, or am I lazy or am I just exhausted? It's really hard because I've never had a lot of self-discipline in my life. I've always had a lazy streak or yeah. And so, but I also have had a wonderfully serviceable body in this life, and I am very grateful to it. And I don't want it to rest before it has to. And I feel like, so I feel driven to push it, but I'm just never sure where that line is, I'm sitting, it's painful. Yeah. Or I used to be able to ride 5 or 6 horses a day. Now 2 is a stretch. So yeah, how
Do you have to know?
much do I have to know?
Do you have to know if you're lazy or what was the other one? Needing rest?
truly exhausted or tired. Yeah. I don't know.
These are just labels
Those
that
are
you're putting
just
on how you
labels.
feel. So what if you pick a different label?
Like what?
I don't know. But it seems like each label you pick has a value judgment on it.
Yeah. Because if anybody tells me that they're lazy, I always argue with them and say, well, maybe you're unmotivated, but lazy isn't even a thing, Nobody's naturally lazy. Maybe you just don't feel like doing that thing. So I should probably talk to myself that way.
Mm.
But yeah, and I've been the last. Yeah, I do need to talk to myself the way I talk to other people because I'm nice to other people for the most part. But th- uh, yeah, I've just lost my thought. Which is another distressing symptom of aging.
Well, as you were speaking there, Teiko, a portion of the story of the Buddha's enlightenment came to mind. And it was sort of the early part where he had been practicing with the forest ascetics for years and had disciplined himself to near death, near starvation. And he was discouraged and disappointed and frustrated and sat down at the base of a tree. And a woman came by thinking he was a tree spirit, offered him a meal of rice and milk. And he decided that, what's the point? I'm just going to eat, even though he had done all of these ascetic practices around denying himself food for so long. He decided he was going to take a meal. And he felt better after taking that meal. And it was that meal that allowed him to have the resolve to say, I'm going to sit here until I understand the causes of suffering. And so he sat and he had his enlightenment experience. And there are stories and stories and stories about what happened that night and what happened immediately afterward. But part of what gets skipped over a lot is that aspect of he had pushed himself so hard. And it wasn't until he took a little bit of nourishment that he was able to say, I'm going to resolve to sit and do this. It's not like he hadn't resolved to do that years and years ago, but he had pushed so hard that he didn't have the capacity really. So perhaps giving yourself a little bit of rest when you're feeling tired, a little bit of that sustenance that will allow you to do more later.
Yeah, I'm sure that's good advice. And
Next time you lay down for a nap, you can say, this is my rice and milk.
Well, and I do also recognize a not insignificant component of pride when other people, say, oh, I can't, sit on the floor. I'm like, well, that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. People who sit on the floor don't get enlightened faster than people who sit in a chair. But when it comes to me sitting in a chair, why that's different. I just, it's silly. Yeah. So, and it's not just the sitting in a chair, it's things like that, all the things that are harder than they used to be.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And yet you still internally compare them to standards that you hold in your mind.
Yeah. Yeah. Aging is a really interesting process that who could be prepared for?
Yeah. And when it's little kids that we're talking about, we don't talk about little kids aging. We talk about little kids growing up. And yet they have as much changes in their body and mind as people who are aging. I remember
really
pain
true.
in my bones as they grew.
Yeah.
And all of the weirdness of puberty.
Oh, you couldn't pay me to be 15 again, or even 30. No.
I don't know that this is the point of the conversation, but when you guys were talking, this came up. How do you stop comparing?
I think you get better at noticing when you do it. catching yourself when you do it. Oh, I'm comparing again. Is this useful? Probably not. There are times when comparing is useful and is required. So know when comparing is appropriate to what's going on at hand, and know when comparing is just extra suffering, right? If you're trying to decide two things at the store, you're going to do some comparing to figure out what is the best thing to purchase. If you're doing almost anything else, it's probably extra. Is the piece of chocolate I had today better or worse than the piece of chocolate I had yesterday? I don't know. I think that's a little bit extra. Could be the topic of a short story. I don't know, but it's extra.
I was just
But yeah,
thinking,
that capacity of just noticing when you're doing it and when it is causing suffering, and letting go of that comparing mind. Okay, I see you. We don't need to do this right now. And the next time it happens, okay, I see you. We don't need to do this right now. And eventually it rolls itself back. I'm sorry, go ahead, whoever was gonna speak next.
I was just thinking about the Rohatsu and sitting for the whole time, and I thought, oh, I don't know if I really want to do that. But I did. And sometimes it was uncomfortable. Even though I'm sitting in a chair. It's interesting because I do sit in a chair, doesn't mean I'm so totally comfortable. My body gets restless. My legs are twitching around. But at the end, even though there was discomfort, it was really amazing, to just leave quietly. And I was calmer for the rest of the evening. So, I definitely have an aging body, and I definitely sometimes, I mean, like I did say to myself, I don't think I can sit for the whole time. I just don't think I can. But I did. And so, I guess I'm learning to accept the aging body. There are times when I come home from doing something, not even anything that strenuous, and I feel like taking a nap in the afternoon. And I was talking to somebody else who's getting older, and they said, well, yeah, I always take a nap in the afternoon. I'm going, oh, but I don't think I should take a nap in the afternoon. I should go out and do something. So I think we all have, like I was thinking when Teiko was talking about, other people can sit in a chair, but she can't. We all have that pride. Other people take a nap in the afternoon, but I should not take a nap in the afternoon. I should keep on going. So it's interesting. It's an interesting discussion. And it doesn't seem to matter how old we are. We still have things that we can't do.
In the in Kyogen's book that we've been reading, have we gotten to his story about the guy finding the perfect armchair? He has a story about how suffering arises. And it's like there's Kyogen's a way better storyteller than I am, so I'm going to butcher this. But a guy is searching for the perfect chair. And he goes out looking, and he looks and he looks and he looks, and he finally finds the perfect chair. It is so comfortable. It supports his back the way he wants it to. It supports his legs the way he wants it to. Perfect chair. If he sits in that chair for an hour, he's probably fine. If he sits in that chair for a full day, he might start to get a little restless. If he stays in that chair for a week, he's going to become very, very uncomfortable. And if he sits in that chair longer, he might become crippled just by not moving out of that chair. So he has this perfect armchair, but even through doing nothing, suffering arises simply because what changed? The chair didn't change. He didn't change. Well, technically he changed, but he didn't change. But even with that perfect chair, suffering arose. And the longer he stays with that chair, the more uncomfortable it's going to be. So even if you sit in a chair and it's not sitting on the floor, sitting in that chair long enough, it's going to get uncomfortable. And for all the folks who were sitting in chairs at Rohatsu, I saw them get uncomfortable. So please don't think sitting in a chair is any better or worse than sitting on the floor, because in each case, people are going to be uncomfortable after a while. Any last thoughts? We're at 8:16. Alrighty. The universe is as the boundless sky. Just as the lotus is not wetted by the water that surrounds it, the mind is immaculate and beyond the dust. Let us bow to the highest Lord. All Buddhas throughout space and time, all Arahants, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, wisdom beyond wisdom, Maha Prajna Karmita. Thank you all. I hope you have good nights.
Thank you, Jyoshin.
Thank you, Jyoshin.
Every
Right.
every